Let's see if I get copyright claimed. I remember just being infuriated by this.
Concerned Women of America. I've looked up, for America, I do beg your pardon. I've looked up some of the things you're concerned about, and one of them is something I'm very concerned about.
The camera
too,
work in this
which
is also
Darwin
really
and
funny.
Evolution. But why are you concerned about evolution?
Yes, well, what a person believes about how human beings were created shapes what they believe about human beings. That if we believe
I would like to, like, every conservative organization that exists always has some sort of, like, really manipulative, like, phrasing in the title. Concerned Women for America. Like, it's always, like, family packed, like, it's always so manipulative. It's so funny.
human beings were created out of love, that is, by a loving creator, and has given each one of us not only a material body, but a spirit and a soul, we then are more likely to treat other people with respect and dignity.
Yes, but
Okay, I don't know if I'm just gonna be saying exactly what Richard Dawkins is gonna be saying, but I love how the justification for her belief is that there is good that comes out of the belief. Like, if you believe this, then people will be nicer to each other. It's like, okay, well, that says nothing about the validity of your claim at all, right? Like, you could say, if we believed we were horses, we would be nice to each other, right? But you're not gonna say that you're a horse. Right? People are nicer to dogs. If we believed we're all dogs, we would be nicer to each other. Like, you could just say that to her, right? I'm sure she would disagree with that.
But you have to contend with facts, don't you? And, I mean, if evolution is a scientific fact, you might as well be concerned about gravity or the Milky Way, mightn't you?
Yes. Well, there's been an effort within the scientific community to...
Also, I'm one of the reasons why this debate is so infuriating to me is because of the I just spilled some, like, water on my keyboard. The way that she conducts herself behaviorally here, you can tell that she's not listening to what he's saying at all. And I'm not saying that because she disagrees with him. I'm saying, like, based on how she acts here. So listen to how she just said, like, she's like, yes, like, before he's even finished, she's like, yes, like, you can tell she's not absorbing anything he's saying. She's just waiting for her turn to talk, right? It's very frustrating. Like, she's made up her mind. There's not a single possibility that she could be wrong about this. Like, she's already invested herself so much into this belief that, like, she would just be way too embarrassed to think critically about it, you know?
If evolution is a scientific fact, you might as well be concerned about gravity or the Milky Way, mightn't you?
Yes. Well, there's been an effort within the scientific community to censor out information against evolution that proves that evolution may not be as many scientists believe. There have been many times in which evidence that was brought forward to bolster the idea of evolution turned out to be fraudulent.
What's an example of that?
So what we argue for is to teach the controversy. Don't censor out the facts that go against evolution, such as the famous pig's tooth, the tooth that was claimed to be an example of a prehistoric man and turned out to just be the tooth of a pig. There are numerous examples like that. So teach the controversy rather than
the facial expression, the squinting eyes, the smile, the way she speaks. It's like everything about it is so condescending throughout. It's like so frustrating to watch this. I remember I was just enraged by this when I saw it. I'm not as much now, but I saw this for the first time when I was, like, probably 18 or something, 17, I don't know.
The information that shows
she's
that
so
evolution
smug.
is questionable.
Seriously, there isn't a controversy. There may be a controversy within evolution about certain details, but the fact of evolution is uncontroversial. I mean, whether you like it or not, we're cousins of chimpanzees, we're slightly more distant cousins of monkeys, etc. I mean, pig's teeth are really irrelevant. Of course you can dig up mistakes and even outright fraud. I mean, the Piltdown hoax was an outright fraud. But that was never used as evidence for evolution. It was just a particular case of somebody in the 1920s who fraudulently...
Yeah, so, like, by her logic, if you find someone claiming that God did something and it turns out that it was just a scam, that means all of Christianity is, like, incorrect. Like if she's like, oh, we're going to teach the controversy is big, the pig's tooth. They thought it was a missing, part of her lineage. It turned out to be a pig's tooth. It's like, okay, well, there's people that claim that Jesus showed up on fucking toast, right? Like, and then it turns out some of them just like literally had like a brander, a branding instrument, right? So it's like, does that mean Jesus isn't real to your logic? It's like, yeah, just try to apply what she's saying to her own beliefs, and it's just not. Yeah, she would never agree with that. So it's so inconsistent and very frustrating.
Made up a fossil.
There's no evidence of evolution from one species to another. There's microevolution within a species, but not going from one species to another.
Oh, really?
That's so fun. That's such a funny thing to say, because it's like, well, microevolution exists within a species, but not from one species to another. It's like, are dogs and wolves different species? Like, where do you stand on dogs existing? Because dogs and wolves are like we categorize those as like different species, right? And if you it's so weird about this, because like for the longest time, maybe this was a belief by Christians, but at the very least, I thought that they believed it. I thought that Christians believed like, no, evolution doesn't exist even on a micro level. Like they just ignored that vaccines get updated and that the flus exist, and that they evolve and blah 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 blah, right? But it's like, if you believe in microevolution, all you have to do is just imagine, okay, that plus time. Right? Like, think about how far away a dog from a wolf is. If you're saying that is not enough to be different species, then how much time has existed since human beings started breeding wolves to, be dogs? How much time has existed from like a wolf to a fucking pug? How much time? Take that same amount of time and double it. You have something that's twice as different, right? So eventually you do have things that we would consider to be like different species. You would get to the point where it's like, okay, they can't even breed, right? Like that's all you have. All you have to do is just imagine, okay, just add more time onto it. And there it's like, so it's really not a difficult concept.
Really?
And actually, you're the way you have framed this and your very closed-mindedness really is a very good example of the kind of censorship we see within the scientific community that won't even allow discussion about the controversy, that says...
as he does an unbroken single-shot interview with her, but...
that we can't even discuss any evidence that might show that evolution is questionable.
I like how she calls it evidence. Evidence to show that evolution is questionable. We can't even. We're being canceled. We can't even discuss this. We're being censored.
Scientists,
yeah, the idea of like censorship to a person like her is like, this isn't being taught in schools alongside evolution. My Jesus ideas about the pig tooth proving evolution wrong, that's not taught in schools. Therefore, this is censorship. Although it is taught in like religious schools throughout the country. Is just like a bunch of Christian bullshit.
And yet when people who look at the evidence, go to the Smithsonian Museum on Natural History,
that
and when we
squint
look
and
for
smile, I
where's
hate
the
it.
evidence to show evolution from one species to another, all we find are drawings, illustrations. There aren't the actual material evidence showing.
Oh,
it.
you only see drawings and illustrations. Like she needs to like witness it happen. Like she needs to exist for like millions of years and like be there and just look.
So, while
she
there
needs to
are
be a literal
attempts to
god.
say that only scientists can speak on this, what we have are scientists that are then creating an isolated community and saying that we're the ones, it's almost like a religion in which
that's my favorite conservative argument is like, you're a religion. That's my favorite thing that Christians do. No, you're a religion. Like, okay, so are you agreeing that like religion is like not based on facts, and that are you therefore concede, like, if you're gonna be like you're wrong because you're a religion, are you gonna agree then that religion is not like having anything to do with evidence, or
what particular scientists say, but the scientists who question evolution are being censored out, are being blackballed out of the scientific community,
Blackballed.
and being told that the rest
Does she mean
of the world
blacklisted?
cannot
What is
listen
blackballed?
to them.
I want to ask her, or a person like her, like, okay, you don't believe that humans are biologically related to monkeys, like any sort of like apes. You don't believe that. Do you think that humans resemble apes more closely than other species? Do you at least, can you at least say humans resemble apes much more than other species? That's what I would like to know from these people, is if they're willing to even say that.
The whole thing falls into a beautiful hierarchical pattern, just like a family tree. It is a family tree. How would you explain that?
And where is the evidence?
Well, the evidence is in the DNA.
Excuse me. Where is the evidence of evolution from one species to another species, the macroevolution?
Well, it's in the DNA. It's in the DNA. It's in the geographic.
Yeah, there's like literally nothing that this person would accept as evidence. Like, it's one of the, like, it's such a not difficult concept to grasp when all you have to do is just think, oh, plus time. It's just over time. It's inevitable. If there's like all you have to do is have a concept of like numbers, right? The amount of difference there is between like a parent and a child, that's a minute difference. But take that minute difference, and over time, it becomes a huge difference, right? You do it billions, trillions of times, and then eventually, like, of course, it's like, that's why the species that reproduce over the quickest period of time change the fastest. That's why like diseases evolve so quickly, is because they're reproducing at such a fast rate, right? Whereas human beings live like 70 to 90 years or whatever, like, you know, so we only live to see like so many generations individually.
What you're talking about are commonalities, but again, where's the material evidence of evolution from one species?
Also, I fucking love that, like, Christians, they have to hold on to like these ideas that contradict things said in the Bible when they've already conceded on so much. They've already conceded on like, God doesn't control the weather. Like, I mean, a lot of Christians like believe that, but you can still predict weather to like a good enough degree that like meteorologists exist, right? One of the earliest concessions is like, yeah, behind the clouds isn't heaven, it's space. Like, Christians have had to concede that there's like other planets that exist. But slowly but surely over time, there's more and more and more having to concede of like, oh, well, I guess dinosaur fossils do exist, but God put them there to test us. Like, they have to be like, well, first they were like, no, those don't exist. Dinosaurs didn't exist. And it's like, every single one of these things, like, just believe in if you want to believe in a God, believe in a God. Like, it's funny how they basically admit that, like, well, if we admit that we're wrong on this, then this basically just, you know, kind of makes the whole thing seem like a bunch of bullshit, doesn't it? Is basically what they're saying when they attach themselves so hard onto, like, no, evolution can't be real because that means we weren't created by God. Like, you can still, evolution doesn't like disprove. Evolution being real doesn't disprove the idea of a God. If you want to believe in a God, you can still also believe that evolution exists, right? But their insistence that like no, you can't say that. It means that to them it would disprove it, which is very amusing.
It sounds to me as though you've got some kind of another agenda. Is it perhaps that your hostility to evolution, which by the way is not shared by bishops and archbishops and people like that, your hostility to evolution perhaps stems from something emotional? Like, I mean, is it that you feel...
There's people in my life that have done this, and they're just like, it's fucking awful borderline personality disorder people, where it's like she has to prove she has to prove that she's not driven by emotion in any way by fake laughing. Like, of course, it's like this whole fucking theatrical performance that I hate it so much. I hate these type of people.
By bishops and archbishops.
Just like be honest with your, introspect a little, you know? Question yourself before you even start questioning evolution. Like, look inside yourself, question yourself for a bit, you know?
Like that. Your hostility to evolution perhaps stems from something emotional. Like, I mean, is it that you feel that evolution?
He said like perhaps, and look at this.
I mean, I've heard
this fucking. I hate. Yeah, she reminds me of people in my life that have hurt me. That's why I'm so. This is why it makes me so mad. Yeah, she reminds me of like people who have done awful things to me. But that I cannot stand this. I cannot stand this. This makes me so upset. This is absolutely triggering for me. But yeah, it's like he's offering like the slightest bit of like potential introspection, like just this tiny little like. Do you think perhaps this might be coming from like an emotional reaction? Do you think perhaps your beliefs might be influenced by your emotion? And she doesn't even give herself the opportunity to think about whether or not that could possibly be the case. You know, I'd like to think, I'm pretty sure if you catch me in a similar situation to that, you ask me the same type of question, I would go like, I don't think so. Like, I'd at least say something like, I wouldn't be like, me never. Like, not. She's not even. She's got like a fucking. She's got the Lustguard 9000 up there. You know, she's like blocking any opportunity. Like pew pew. Like deflect. Right. With that, she won't even allow a shrivel of like any part of her brain to even consider that she might be like having some sort of like emotional basis for her beliefs. She like won't let it happen. She refuses to let it happen. She's intentionally preventing herself from thinking about it, right? That's what bothers me. And that's what so many fucking awful people in my life and a lot of other people's lives do, is they're just so fucking deluded about themselves. And yeah, just they know that they have to lie to themselves. A part of them knows, and a part of them knows that they're actively preventing themselves from thinking further on a subject, and they put up these barriers to prevent themselves from realizing truths about themselves that make them uncomfortable.
There's no hostility and there's no hidden agenda. We've been very upfront with what it is we believe. And the ad hominem attacks that people who favor evolution use against people who don't buy into that, I think shows the lack of confidence in the evidence. If evolution had so much evidence behind it.
Don't say you want to punch her. I know she does bring out a lot of rage, but it's probably best to avoid that language. I know, I understand. Don't worry, I get it. But probably don't say those sorts of things. Okay, in Minecraft? Okay, never mind. It's in Minecraft. That's fine.
Then those in favor of evolution would not have to be reduced to ad hominem attacks against...
She said, okay, the first time she said ad hominem, not ad hominem, which is what it's supposed to be. First time I was like, okay, she just like misspoke. But now that she said it a second time, I'm like, does she actually think it's ad hominem?
Evolution would not have to be reduced to ad hominem attacks.
This is the second time she said it, ad hominem. That's very funny.
The Latin language is a Victorian invention designed to,
And I think that's a perfect example of the hostility that those who favor evolution have toward those who don't buy into the idea, who say, show us the evidence, and yet those in favor of evolution can't show us the evidence that we're looking for.
I'm sorry, but we can show you the evidence. All you need to do is read an elementary textbook of biology. It's all there.
Well, that's interesting. You should bring out the textbooks on biology. We still have
single
textbooks
cameraman
today.
too. It's so funny. I'm just imagining him shuffling around.
No,
Worry that you
if
have,
you're
because
looking You're looking for a so-called agenda. I'll tell you what it is. We believe that human beings should be treated with respect and dignity.
Yes.
And the reason we
Well, so
believe
do I,
that,
of course.
the reason we believe that is because we can see that
If you believe in evolution, you don't believe human beings should be treated with respect and dignity, is basically what she just said.
God created each one of us. And what we find is that philosophies that are built on evolution oftentimes lead to horrific abuses against human beings. And you can see why, because it's drawn on a foundation.
Sorry, say that one more time. Sorry.
And oftentimes lead to horrific. We believe that
Horrendic?
human beings should be treated with respect.
Also,
and
is she going to say
dignity.
Hitler
And the
believed in
reason we believe
evolution?
that-
Of course.
The reason we believe that is because we can see that God created each one of us. And what we find is that philosophies that are built on evolution oftentimes lead to horrific abuses against human beings. And
Oh, yeah, like, religious people don't commit atrocities. I can't think of a single religious person that's ever committed atrocities, especially motivated by their religion. That's never happened. That's never happened. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, everybody that commits atrocities believes in evolution.
you can see why, because it's drawn on a foundation that says human beings are just material and they should be judged according to their utilitarian use. What thing can they provide for society?
Okay.
We don't believe that.
Yes, okay.
We believe that each human being, whether they can supply something to society or not, if they are disabled, if they are young, that they should be treated with the same amount of respect as you and I should be treated.
Yes, I mean, I accept all that, and I agree with that. I mean, I also think humans should be treated with respect. But what we have here is an agenda. It's that you want humans to be treated with respect, and therefore, if the scientific facts go against what your perception is, then you're going to distort the scientific facts. Now, why don't you instead accept the scientific facts and say, but we still want to treat humans with respect? Let's look at evolution and let's see that we can indeed treat humans with
Because
respect
what I go back
within
to,
the evolution framework.
what I go back to is the evolutionists are still lacking the science.
The evolutionists. she's still doing the "you're a religion, no you." It's so funny. It's one of my favorite Christianisms. They do it all the time. No you. No, you're grooming children. That's the current one. Yeah. You're grooming children into your lifestyle before they can consent about it. Never mind like baptism and like all the religious content geared towards children and how you're brought into it by your parents. Never mind weird shit like circumcision, cutting baby dicks off, and never mind all the Catholic priests and how the organization, literally the organization was covering it up. How how the profession is something that is attractive to, and a lot of go into because people won't question why you're not married. The whole celibacy thing. There's the trust of the whole community and access to people's children. Literally attracts to be Catholic priests. Yeah, let's not. But gay people are grooming your kids, folks, not religious people.
As there is no evidence of evolution from going from one species to another species. If evolution had occurred, then surely, whether it's going from birds to mammals or even beyond that, surely there'd be at least one
There's a
evidence.
massive amount of evidence.
There'd be at least one evidence.
Sorry, but you people keep repeating that like a kind of mantra because you just listen to each other. I mean, if only you would just open your eyes and look at the evidence.
Show it to me. Show me the bones. Show me the carcass. Show me the evidence.
The bones of what?
The in-between stage from one species to another. Evolutionists
Excuse me.
bear the burden of providing the
Evolutionists.
evidence. There could be a hidden agenda on the part of those in favor of Darwin.
No, you're a hidden agenda. What's funny about this is she seems to deny her hidden agenda, but he described her hidden agenda as you want to believe this because you believe that people will treat each other better if they believe that they are created by God. And she's basically denying it this whole time, but she literally opened the entire debate. Those were her first words, was her saying, people should believe in creationism because people act better towards each other if they believe that they're like that's literally what she said. And then she's like, I don't have a hidden agenda, but that's what he described her hidden agenda as being, and she's saying that that's not what she's doing, but she opened up her entire debate by saying that.
Now, I just told you about Australopithecus, Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Homo sapiens. By the way, archaic Homo sapiens and then modern Homo sapiens. That's a beautiful series of
You're
intermediates.
still lacking the material evidence.
The material evidence is there. Go to the museum and look at it.
So what I go back to again is let's look at what evolution and Darwinism has spawned. Let's look at the philosophies that have come out of it that have been so horrific to our world. So we need to look at the philosophies behind and that have grown out of evolution. And what we find are the societies that are the most loving and caring, the societies that are the most well-functioning, are the ones that have a great respect for human beings, for others, because they recognize that each human being was created individually and is distinct from one another. Interesting enough, regarding that, you mentioned.
Can you show me a graph of like societies that treat each other the best being like the most religious? Because I'm pretty sure that's not the case. As you speak from the country that houses 25% of the world's prison population. You know, as you speak from the most incarcerated country on the planet.
How the DNA is common among various species, but among human beings, each one of us has distinct DNA. In fact, that's the one. That's one thing that's quite a way that. Sorry, back up. That's one thing that scientists will use to determine who has committed a crime, is basing it on the DNA evidence. So even DNA helps to show that each human being.
It's like she's memorized this. Like she's like, oh wait, back up. Yeah, it's like she is reading from like a script in her mind. Like she's just going off the talking points. She's not having an actual conversation. He's like genuinely trying to like understand what she's saying, and she's like just going over the playing the oldies, you know. It's funny how much she said like in the previous that you can't even address her saying like the most barbaric countries are the least religious. Like you can't even address her saying that because she said like 6 other things. Like I think that's called gish galloping. I'm not sure.
Well, I don't have them here, obviously, but you can go to any museum and you can see Australopithecus, you can see Homo habilis, you can see Homo erectus, you can see archaic Homo sapiens.
Any museum? What if I went to the porn museum?
Series of intermediates. Why do you keep saying present me with the evidence when I've
get wrecked, Dawkins?
And I have gone to the museums, and so have so many of us who still are not convinced.
Have you seen
evolution.
Have you seen Homo erectus?
And I think that this effort,
not even going to answer
this
him.
rather aggressive effort to try and talk over us and to censor us seems to come out of a frustration that so many people still don't believe in evolution. Now, if evolutionists were so confident in their beliefs, there wouldn't be the effort to censor out information that shows that evolution is still lacking and is questionable.
I confess to being frustrated. It's not about suppression, it's about the fact that I have told you about 4 or 5 fossils and you seem to simply be ignoring what I'm saying.
Why
don't you go
laughing?
And certainly, if they were in the museums, which I've been to many times, then I would look at them objectively. But what I go back to is
she's only been to Ken Ham's Creationist Museum.
The philosophy of evolution has led to ideologies that have been so destructive to the human race.
Please elaborate.
I mean, even Hitler could be described as a misunderstanding of Darwinism, and that's a grotesque and horrible
eugenicists, and those in favor of euthanasia, and those in favor of infanticide.
Yes. But wouldn't it be a good idea?
Okay.
Instead of pointing to misperceptions of Darwinism, which have been hideously misused politically, if you try to understand Darwinism, then you'll be in a position to counteract these horrible misunderstandings.
Actually, we are oftentimes forced by the aggressiveness of those who favor evolution. It's not as if we are hidden from this information that you keep presenting.
Oh, is that what she meant by infanticide? She meant abortion? Oh, no.
as if it's unknown to us because we can't get away from it. It's pushed on us all the time. But I think your frustration comes from the fact that so many of us who have seen your information still don't buy into your ideology.
Have you seen Homo erectus? Have you seen Homo habilis? Have you seen Australopithecus?
I love that we finally get the shot of her face when she does that laugh. Ugh.
Buy into your ideology.
Have you seen Homo erectus? Have you seen Homo habilis? Have you seen Australopithecus?
It's like what's frustrating to me about this, and it's not just a laugh that comes of like, oh, I'm not letting myself even consider what he's saying. It's a way of trying to signal to the person that you're laughing at that you're winning, and that is so fucking immature. It is so childish. Where it, like in any kind of like contentious, like any kind of like argument or discussion with someone, you have to signal, I'm winning. Like, that's what she's doing. Like, it's so childish. And there's people in my life that have done that, and I hate those people. Not for that. They're like much worse people than just those moments. But the people that are also terrible do that, you know. It reminds me of terrible people because they do that sort of thing where they have to go, I'm winning, in the middle of that's literally what they're signaling. Yeah. It's to like convince you like I'm winning. I hate it.
Homo erectus? Have you seen Homo habilis? Have you seen Australopithecus?
What I've seen is that in the museums and in the textbooks that whenever they claim that to show the evolution from one species to another, it relies on illustrations and drawings,
doesn't.
not the not any.
It relies on illustrations and drawings. By the way, the Bible. There's hard evidence for all that shit. Your theory of evolution relies on illustrations and drawings, not like my holy book. Yeah,
to see the original.
All of my beliefs come from words.
Fossils, but you can see casts of fossils, exact copies of these fossils, in any major museum.
Well, let me ask you, why are you so aggressive? Why is it that
this is like the 6th time she's called him aggressive? He's like the least aggressive person.
Why is it so important
He's so calm.
to you that everyone believe like you believe?
Well, I'm not talking about belief. I'm talking about facts. I'm talking about. I've told you about certain fossils, and every time I ask you about them, you evade the question and you turn to something else.
Well, I can say, even if, again, I say that you can name a few of those, but they still don't show. They still don't prove evolution from the slime to the intricate human body.
Well,
there should be, if we had gone from that broad of an evolution, there should be overwhelming tons of material evidence, not just an isolated thing here and there. But again, there is.
It's weird to call Homo erectus isolated.
Hominid fossils, because I thought you'd be most interested in them. But you can find similar fossils from any vertebrate group you care to name. Of course, there are lots.
But I guess I go back to, why is it so important to you that everyone believes?
It's funny how she accused him of interrupting earlier, and now is.
Evolution. Why do you seem to almost feel like it's dangerous for people to believe that human beings were created individually and with a distinctness and created by a creator?
That's such a huge projection. She's like, you're pushing this because you think the other belief is dangerous. It's like, that's literally what you said at the beginning. It's not only what you said at the beginning, you said it like 3 more times when you're like, well, people that believe in evolution commit atrocities like infanticide. Like, you're literally, you can't. She's not allowing herself to like be self-aware at any moment.
Creator.
Well,
Why is that?
I don't like
creator.
Belief. I prefer to just ask people to look at the evidence, and I'm asking you to look at the evidence.
Well, and I'm asking you, why does it seem so dangerous to you? Why is it so important to you that people not believe in a creator?
No, that's
creator.
Not the point. I mean, the point is that as a scientist, I'm concerned that children.
Like, immediately just goes back into that fucking smile. Like, she's like, no, I'm winning. See, you're stupid. You're stupid. I'm above you.
Believe in a creator.
Look at what she does here.
No, that's not the point. I mean, the point is that as a scientist,
she has to fix herself because she was given she was like giving a genuine expression and then remembered, like, oh no, I have to put this back on.
Children in American schools and in schools elsewhere should be exposed to the evidence and allowed to make up their minds about the evidence.
And we completely agree. In fact, that's why the challenge in America, whenever this debate comes up, is teach the controversy, teach the evidence, because as it is now, in many cases, school children are only being taught about evolution. They're not being taught about the frauds in evolution and the lack of evidence in evolution. So it's actually us
How do you?
who are.
What do you What are you suggesting to teach about the lack of evidence in evolution? You haven't taught about the lack of evidence in it. Like, what do you mean? What are you suggesting?
Arguing for teaching all the evidence, not just the ones that are favorable to evolutionists.
Well,
All
it's
the
a rich
evidence.
controversy. I mean, there are, of course, other creation stories than Genesis. Do you believe that the world is young, for example? Do you believe the world is less than 10,000 years old?
Well, I believe that God created the world, and the time frame, it can be unknown. As we look in the Bible, it's hard to know what a day, the length of time that might mean in that context. So
That's sneaky. What's funny, like, I don't know if he'll get into this, but like, he's like, yeah, there's not just one story about like creation. Like, there's other religions too, right? Like, there's. Do you want to be teaching like every religion when you're saying like, no, we should teach everything, not just one viewpoint. We should teach all viewpoints. It's like, okay, well, should we be teaching the flying spaghetti monsters, version of creationism? Like,
I go back to those, the human being, because that's like what I think we really care about, are human beings. And are human beings created through the loving touch of a creator, or just came out of slime?
Well, if you were to talk to a bishop, the bishop would probably say, yes, human beings were created by a loving creator, but he used evolution in order to do it. I mean, that would be the position of the Archbishop of Canterbury.
And that does show that there's a variety of opinions across the board among those who may not buy completely into the hardcore ideas of evolution. There are those who believe in different levels of evolution within creation, and that really shows kind of a creative independence within our movement that seems to be a bit lacking among those who believe in evolution and only evolution.
But as I've just told you, there are bishops who believe in evolution. Indeed, just about all bishops believe in evolution. And they would say
you would have to clarify what denomination of bishops, to say a broad term like that.
But the ones I'm familiar with are Anglican and Catholic. But that's okay. I mean, there are certainly lots of very, very senior church people.
They're not the correct ones. They're not creationists. They're not evangelical.
I mean, there are certainly lots of very, very senior church people who do believe in evolution, and so there is a broad. I mean, there are those, and there are others who are not bishops, but who are scientists or also Christian, or also Jews, and who believe in evolution, but who think that the idea of God kind of intervening in this sort of conjuring trick way is rather blasphemous. I mean, I know evolutionist colleagues who are also devout Christians who think that it's to the greater glory of God to study the way science actually is, rather than to try to bring God in as a kind of magician who kind of, waves a wand and things happen.
Yeah,
Isn't that rather demeaning to God?
I think, and that is a misinterpretation, misframing of what we believe. We believe that God can and does intervene throughout history and in life. And we say,
yeah, you just take issue with the word magician, probably.
And there are others who say that God set up the laws of physics, the laws of the universe, and he did it in such a cunning way that when the time came, evolution got going and eventually produced us. Isn't that a rather grand and noble vision of God?
It is, and in fact, we believe that as well. We believe that science is unlocking the mysteries of the laws put in place by God, that God created this earth with certain laws like the law of gravity to allow it to function, and that science is actually is discovering and unlocking the secrets of the laws that God put in place.
But you just dispute science, though.
Which are evolution, which follows from the laws of chemistry and physics.
She has to laugh. I hate that. She's like, I'm winning constantly. Like, she can't. It's so performative and so obnoxious.
The laws of chemistry.
It's very
and physics.
Insecure. There are many people who do believe that God intervenes.
Thank you so much for the sub.
This world, and uses various laws like gravity or progression to
She's repeating like her talking point from like a minute ago. She's just going through the list. She's not having a real conversation. It's so frustrating.
create a more stable world, a better world. So I don't think that there is much.
She's just reciting.
I don't want to be respected for my beliefs. I want you to respect the facts. I want you to look at the facts. Don't respect me. I don't want respect. I want you to go to museums and look at the facts. And don't believe what you've been told that there is no evidence. Just go and look at the evidence.
Yes, and
It's
what
not
I would
funny.
say.
I mean,
Yeah.
really, go and. I've told you about hominid fossils.
She's just she can't help herself. She's like, it's crazy. It reeks of insecurity. It's so annoying.
Go and look at the evolution of the horse. You can go and look at the evolution of the early mammals. You can go and look at the evolution of fish. You can go and look at the transition from fish to land-living amphibians and reptiles. Any of those things.
You're
find in any
crazy.
good museum. Just open your eyes and look at the facts.
And I would say open your eyes and see the communities that have been built by those who believe in a loving God who created each one of us. And what I find is that is.
This is Richard Dawkins and creationist Wendy Wright. This is like pre-debate culture on YouTube, but it was an epic battle of ideas or whatever we want to call it. This is just something that like is kind of nostalgic for me and very infuriating to watch. So, thanks.
Is the kind of world that most of us would want to live in, one in which there is a deep respect for other human beings.
She keeps going back. This is the first thing she said. The very beginning of the interview, she's like, yeah, people will respect each other more if they believe that they came from a god and not from nothing or monkeys or something. And then he's like, do you have a motivation for believing this? Like you want people to believe it because you like the outcome and not because the facts support it? She's like, I know. And then twice after she goes back to saying, yeah, I believe it because people will treat each other better if they believe it. And it's like, well, you're so contradictory.
The world of nature is a Darwinian world. It's a very unpleasant world. It's a thoroughly unpleasant world, not the kind of world we wish to live in. So let us understand it so that we can construct the kind of society.
Did I already watch part 3? Or are their arguments just so circular that this is happening?
And one of the things they've been involved in is the debate over teaching evolution or intelligent design in the schoolrooms. And the position we've taken is teach the controversy, teach all the information, not just selected information that promotes one viewpoint, which most of the times that's evolution. But let's teach all the information so that the school children can learn how to think for themselves.
Yeah, let's teach it alongside Flying Spaghetti Monster.
And I think that's why we need variety of people looking at theories and challenging it, because if it's one person who's dictating what can be challenged or can't, or what evidence is substantial or not, then we have a dictatorship. In science, scientists should be free to challenge theories and not be hemmed in, not be restricted by the current zeitgeist of those who are almost the high priests of science of that day.
It's the overwhelming majority of scientists agreed on evolution being the explanation for, the current point right now of things being set in motion, Yeah.
This is right. I mean, I agree with that. But can you point to any positive scientific evidence in favor of creation?
I think the fact, as you pointed out, DNA, I think DNA helps to show that each one of us are individuals. And
what? How does that? Each DNA shows that we are individuals. Therefore, God created us.
Yes, but they have to be individuals for evolution to work. I mean,
I don't think that's the case. I think that the fact that each one of us are distinct, that no two of us are exactly alike, that helps to show that there is some intervention at the point of each person's creation.
Do you know about
What? Did you don't under? What does she think? Does she think evolution says that people aren't unique genetically? Like,
Some
what does she think that she's saying?
Do you know about the Darwinian theory that it's about individual variation being selected? There has to be individual variation or Darwinism wouldn't work.
What also seems to be shown in the scientific evidence is that mutations
She doesn't even address what he just
die
said.
out. And we don't have good evidence of positive mutations being the ones that are then built on, because if they're a mutation, they're alone. So in order for something to rise up and have more of it, you need to have a good base to choose from. For example, a recessive gene in a person. Both parents may have brown eyes, and yet a child may have blue eyes. And that's because there's enough of the gene in their ancestors to have brought out that recessive gene.
And that's evidence against evolution?
I think that helps to show the individual nature of each person, that God created us with genes, with DNA, and that He will even use that to show His creative element in each person. The fact that you can have two people, a man and a woman, could have 13 children, 16 children, and each one is completely distinct from one another. That shows that.
Yeah, but I mean, generally, white people have white children still, right? Like, God isn't, like, yeah. What do you mean? Like, each one can be distinct, but distinct in ways where they're still using genes from their parents, right? So it's not completely random. It's not like, oh, God's like, and you're black,
Even though they came from a common parentage, that yet there's still a creative element.
Did she say
for
parentage?
each one of them.
You couldn't have evolution unless there was individual variation. You must not keep thinking that because there's individual variation, that's somehow evidence against evolution.
So I come back to you, and
Why are you laughing when you're not even addressing what he's saying, and you clearly don't understand what he's saying?
Once I was going through the Smithsonian Natural History Museum with dear relatives of mine, and one of them was a severely handicapped little girl who can't do anything for herself. She can't talk, she can't walk, she can't feed herself, she can barely sit up. And when one of the people I was with turned to me and said, "Do you believe in evolution?" And I said, "I think this little girl is a perfect example of why evolution is wrong. Because here's someone who cannot take care of herself, and yet she has a spirit. She's not just a material being." And that's one.
But if you stop taking care of her, she'd die. It's not her spirit. It's the doctors that are keeping her alive. Jesus. If this is just her spirit, she'd be fucking dead, lady.
I find between the ideology of Darwinism and evolution and those who believe in a loving God is the idea of a spirit and a soul that is not material, and it's something that it makes us distinct from animals.
Yes, we are distinct from animals. We are so much better.
The way I understood you to say it, it's because of your conscious, or even your consciousness, which would be different things. But for someone, though, who is not capable of making decisions.
Does that mean she doesn't have a consciousness? Like, is that what she's saying? She's not, like, what is she trying to say? She's like, well, if a mentally disabled person doesn't have a soul, well, like, they don't have a brain, so what do they got? Like, what is she saying?
So if only a being that has a material, well, let me back up on that. It's the material, the matter, the brain, or the consciousness. Like, well, let me back there, because those are two separate things. I guess I'm confused.
She's
in what
struggling.
You're saying. That a brain means you have a soul. A consciousness means you have a soul.
He should have just said, no, I don't believe in souls. That would have made it so much easier for her to understand. But since he was like, well, I believe I have a soul in the sense that I have a consciousness, she's not able to like grasp what the fuck he even said. So now she's stun locked. She's like absolutely confused.
But someone whose brain is not functioning, would they then not have a soul?
Someone who didn't have a brain that was capable of consciousness, somebody who was a human vegetable in effect, would not have the properties that you call a soul and that I might call a soul for the sake of argument, but I don't think it's immortal. That's the main difference between us.
And I think that's very key, because that then would work out in how you and I, or someone who believes like you do and someone who believes like I do, would treat someone who is in what's been called a very, I think it's a horrible term, but a vegetarian.
Yeah, she's gonna imply you want to kill them, don't you? I'm a good person.
Many people continue to believe that God has a hand in creating us. I think helps to show that people are using their critical factories. They're not just believing what's being taught in the schools, and that evolutionism is going to continue to have a bit of a challenge here in the United States and beyond.
I've been reading your website, and I get the feeling there's almost a feeling of sort of persecution. I mean, as though somehow you feel that the establishment in the United States is against Christianity. That puzzles me a bit, because, I mean, you know, you've got the White House, you've got...
Yeah, telling a British person that, too.
Many Christians have experienced the hostility toward our beliefs, but beyond hostility, the attempts to even censor and punish us for our beliefs. But let me give you my own experiences. A number of years ago, I was praying in public across the street from an abortion clinic and was sentenced to 6 months in jail for simply praying. It's these kinds of experiences...
excuse me, you were sentenced to 6 months in jail for praying?
For praying.
Could we get a bit more detail about that?
Sure. A judge had signed an injunction stating that certain things could not be done within 100 feet of abortion clinics in that city, in Houston. And so 4 of us knelt and prayed across the street from the clinic, and the judge sentenced us to 6 months in jail and a $500 fine.
What law was that?
It was an injunction. And an injunction is essentially a judge-made law. It only applies to certain people. I was not named on the injunction, and yet the judge found me guilty of it. Thankfully,
Thank you so much for
she was
this
overturned by a higher court. But there are experiences like that throughout the United States where certain people are told and punished for acting out their beliefs.
Yeah, something tells me she wasn't going like... Something tells me she wasn't praying like that. Something tells me they were probably getting some attention. You could just say you weren't praying. You could just be like, I'm meditating. Okay, the defendants had argued that they were only praying on a public sidewalk across the street from the clinic, and that the order violated their constitutional right to free speech. But Miss O'Neill said the 4 knew about the order and that the praying, singing, and preaching constituted a demonstration against Planned Parenthood. So it is kind of dishonest to be like, yo, we were just praying, yo. When you're just like trying to intimidate women going through like one of the hardest points in their lives, just harassing people. More than 200 abortion rights supporters formed a human wall in front of the clinic. What? Is that from the same thing? When the defendants were in court, yeah. So they double protested. Yeah, and it was appealed anyway, right?
Intimidated from coming into the clinic if there were protesters outside. Well, at the same time that 4 of us were quietly kneeling in prayer with no signs or anything like that, there were about 100.
That seems to be disputed, that you were just quietly kneeling in prayer with no signs. That seems to be disputed, but...
pro-abortion demonstrators in front of the clinic, blocking the entrance, screaming and yelling with signs and bullhorns.
What? Pro-abortion demonstrators blocking access to the clinic? Why would they do that? That seems... What are you talking about? What?
To the judge that women would be intimidated from coming into the clinic if there were protesters outside. Well, at the same time that 4 of us were quietly kneeling in prayer with no signs or anything like that, there were about 100 pro-abortion demonstrators in front of the clinic, blocking the entrance, screaming and yelling with signs and bullhorns. But it was those of us who were quietly kneeling in prayer who were sentenced to 6 months in jail. So I think maybe you can understand then why we are so sensitive to wanting to protect our religious freedoms and the ability to act on our consciences.
But you're religiously free to not have an abortion. Like, why do you have to harass other people? Like, you can just not have an abortion. Your religious freedoms are, yourself. Like, stop. Why do you gotta harass other people about it? Like, fuck. It's such a weird disconnect where it's like, my religious freedoms to tell other people what they can and cannot do. Like, fuck, that's not a religious freedom anymore.
When you say teach the controversy, by which I think you mean the controversy between science on the one hand and probably biblical creation on the other, there are lots and lots of creation myths. I mean, the Genesis myth just happens to be the Babylonian Jewish myth, which for historical accident reasons is largely prevalent in the United States. But I mean, why not teach the Hindu myth that we're the product of a cosmic butter churn, or an Australian Aboriginal myth that we come from the dream time? Why pick on the Judeo-Christian Babylonian myth?
What we have argued when we say teach the controversy is teach the controversies in evolution. And to teach the evidence that shows intelligent design. I'm not aware of people arguing that they ought to, that in public schools it ought to be taught the biblical accounts of creation. So
yeah, I'm not aware of people arguing that should be the case. Like, lady, you said you have like what, 50,000 people in your organization? You've never met a single person that thinks that like fucking was it 500,000? You've never met a single person that thinks that Christianity should be taught in schools. And you're not aware of anyone making that argument, living in America, being a religious person?
When we say teach the controversy, we mean teach all the evidence, including the evidence that goes against evolution, teach the evidence for intelligent design.
Who do you think the intelligent designer was?
Well, see, that's something that I think scientists can debate.
See, that's so dishonest, because the entire debate up until this point, she was like, well, yeah, because we can teach people that we came from a loving creator, God. And now he's like, oh, well, who do you think? So if we're supposed to teach that, we come from intelligent design, who designed it? Well, I don't know. Well, I didn't say nothing.
But the idea that there was an intelligent design to the process, in fact, what you've mentioned regarding even natural selection, and that there could be somebody or something that put all these laws in place that now the world is operating off of, does back up this idea that it was a being, an intelligent being, that caused all this, the whole world, to happen.
So why do you take issue? Why have you been taking issue with that this entire time? He gave you an out, like, so many times, saying, like, oh, well, why don't you just, like, why do you have to disagree with evolution when you can still include God in the equation and just say, yeah, God set up the framework for evolution to take place? And she just kept disagreeing with it, and now she seems to agree with it. Now she seems to be offering that as a solution, but like, what? You were disagreeing with it this entire time.
Yes, I mean, that's what a bishop might say. I wouldn't say that, but there are plenty of Christians who would say that. Wouldn't your life be a lot easier if you went along with the bishops and said the evidence in favor of the fact of evolution is overwhelming, so let's accept it and bring God in there?
I think one issue is this idea that we take orders from a hierarchy.
Okay, no,
and
that's fair.
There are some bishops that believe like you do, and there are other bishops that don't,
Yes.
that believe differently.
No.
And so it's easy to select those who believe like you do and rely wholly as if they speak for everyone.
Yes.
But those bishops don't speak for all Christian
okay, I mean,
leaders.
I accept that.
It's crazy how she's losing her smile over the course of this like 40-minute interview or whatever. Like, she was holding it together at the beginning, this like fake like and you can tell she's like getting exhausted. I'm glad that this debate went on for so long, because now you can see like how she's really felt this entire time. She's like starting to lose it. She's like, yeah.
That, and I would hate to suggest
She's like basically crying. She's
that we don't
trying.
read books.
She's almost crying
or
now.
that we don't.
There is a massive amount of evidence. You just need to go into the books and go into the museums and look at it. It's there.
Yes, and
You're
we
believing
and we
people who are
have been-
telling you there's only 1%.
And again, I go back to it's very demeaning to say that
You're not demeaning,
we only
though.
believe. Let's look at the differences of what your philosophy lives out, the evolutionary philosophy, and how does that end up working out in a society?
Yeah, I've accepted that if we worked out society on Darwinian grounds, it would be a very, very unpleasant
Yes.
right-wing society. I've accepted that.
Well, I don't know right wing. It seems to be that you fall back on ad hoc. I recognize that there are varying degrees within the evolutionary beliefs. It's the hardcore evolutionists that reject the idea of a creator that then pave the foundation for very brutal societies.
Well, I have
If you don't believe in creationism, then you're gonna kill everybody.
For very brutal-
You're gonna become a dictator. That's how it happens.
I have accepted that if we were to base our societies on Darwinian principles, they would be brutal, harsh, and unpleasant. I have told you that I want not to live in a Darwinian society. I've suggested to you that it might be a good idea to learn something about Darwinism so as to know what to avoid in setting up society.
And it would be helpful to learn what are the characteristics that make a successful and healthy society. And let's build on those characteristics.
I agree with that, and among those characteristics would be critical thinking, a
Yeah.
respect for education, a respect for evidence,
And respect for human beings.
and a respect for human beings, very much so.
Regardless of whether they can provide for society or provide
Yes,
something to
yes,
society.
indeed.
She
That's
keeps
the essence
she
of the
like
book.
she keeps going back to that. She's like, you believe that disabled people should be genocided. Like, she's like, only creationists believe that people should be treated equally. Like, what the fuck? Stop. Like, you keep going back to that as if like she just keeps repeating the same talking points that have already been debunked and addressed. She's like, well, you would make a bad society. It's like, I've said I don't want to live in a Darwinian society. It's like she just keeps she can't form new thoughts. It's so crazy.
Liberal philosophy which I espouse, that human beings should be respected, their health should be taken care of.
Even if they don't have a functioning brain
Yes.
that is conscious.
They should be given, their hospital care should be taken care of by the state. That's a liberal principle which I espouse. It's an un-Darwinian
And
principle.
I believe
Yeah, I wonder if she believes in universal health care.
that it's not a state, because a state is an institution or an entity. It's human beings that provide care for others.
Oh, okay. This is very funny. She's like, oh yeah, so human beings, and then if you're gay, you don't get help.
Include what makes the better society is one where there is deep respect for each human being, and a
I'm
way to
all for
inculcate.
deep respect for each human being.
And the way to inculcate respect for human beings is by seeing that they were created.
You keep saying
So
that.
Would
With the
you
by a
actually
loving
distort
creator.
the scientific fact in order to create respect
There's
for
no
human
there's no
beings?
need to distort, because as I mentioned, science is a technique, a tactic for discovering and unlocking the keys of how this world works. And so we don't need to deny any facts, because the facts end up bearing out our beliefs. So sometimes it takes time for science to catch up with the beliefs that have made the best societies. Sometimes it takes a while for science, to
Science famously having to catch up with Christianity in terms of facts. Yeah, the Catholic Church's positions on issues has basically been playing catch up with like just basic social progression, you know. Like over time, you know, the popes get more liberal because if they're not, then like like society just gets more liberal without the Catholic Church. And then it's like, why are young people leaving religion?
what
It's so crazy because like religion's like beat into children basically. Like you get baptized, you're like branded as a part of a cult before you can like even speak your first word. You know, you're like immediately put into like, kids programs and have all this like weird religious propaganda specifically aimed at children, Veggie Tales, and like, like parents like putting you into this community where you're forced to like, oh, sing the songs, and meanwhile the lyrics that you don't understand yet but you're singing anyway are saying things like, we will worship, we will obey, we are not worthy, like that shit. And then you like you don't think about how crazy it is until like 20 years later. uh like all that shit. And they're like, yeah, well, you know people that believe in evolution are just so stubborn and unwilling to challenge their beliefs. They only believe it because they were taught that for their child life. It's like, if you took the practices of religion and you got people to treat that the same way they do like kids being exposed to like gay people or like drag queens or something, being like, you're indoctrinating them into your lifestyle. If people looked at what religion does in the same way, like it literally wouldn't exist anymore. Like if you weren't allowed to like indoctrinate children into it, like before that they even understood what was happening. Like that's how it survives. Like that's how it thrives and flourishes. If you take away that, then it doesn't exist anymore. Like it would be a very, very, very few people would be religious. And which is why part of the biggest reasons why like religion is disappearing is because the internet and like children can access information. And if you have genuine questions about things, you can look up other people having discussions about those things. Like you're not just closed into like your own little world anymore, even though most social media websites do still put you in a bubble. Anyone who's curious can actually have that information
that shows the flaws in evolution to be taught. Don't blackball scientists who may not agree wholeheartedly with the hardcore version of evolution to be blackballed out of the profession. Allow people to
She's
have
so
enough respect
repetitive.
For people
She's a broken record.
to allow them to have all the information. So
she said blackball before too.
Jesus and John Wayne covers the whole history of this Christian indoctrination and how it isn't a religion anymore. It's a political cult.
One person's religion looks like another's cult.
I mean, every religion would be considered a cult if it had less followers. There's no difference between a cult and a religion. It's just the amount of people following it, unironically. If you get enough people to follow your cult, you get tax exempt in the U.S. Yeah, we can't, that's got to be the big argument. If anybody ever tries to claim they're religiously persecuted, you got to just be like, your organization isn't taxed. Your organization isn't taxed. I can't believe we still don't tax churches. Like, I don't even think we do in Canada. I can't fucking believe that we don't tax churches. That's, like, absolutely insane to me. Are you trying to argue, the amount of, like, social good that it can have? Because not every church does social good. A lot are incredibly hateful. And even the ones that are, you can point to other groups and organizations that donate money to charities. Every single furry convention I've ever been to has huge amounts of money donated to like animal shelters and shit. They provide a lot of sense of community and belonging for people. Like, fucking don't tax furry conventions then. Like, every argument you can make for not taxing a church, you can make for not taxing a furry convention, unironically. So fucking tax the church.
So it would be wonderful to interview them and let them speak themselves, present their information and their evidence.
Yes.
And to show that there are a variety of views. And that's why the hardcore evolutionists should not have a monopoly on what is allowed to be discussed or researched in science.
She doesn't have new thoughts. Yeah, we're like so far past the point. We're like, even if you're religious, what kind of fucking argument could you possibly have for churches being tax exempt? Why would any business be tax exempt? If any business is tax exempt, then all businesses should be tax exempt. Like, that's like it. Yeah, you can't claim persecution when your business isn't tax exempt. When your business is exempt from taxes, I mean.
It's not taxed because they are supposed to provide community services like food, shelter, and funding. But that is not what happens. The money just goes to growing like cancer.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like in principle, one would argue, in theory, one would argue, like, oh, because they're giving community services, you know, like there was a Sheik temple near one of my friends' works, and they would like apparently they just give away food. You can just walk in there as someone who's like not a Hindu or whatever. I don't know if I'm confusing different terms. I'm very ignorant about non-Western religions, but you can just walk in there and like get free food because that's like a part of their religion. It's not the same as Hindu. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. That's what I thought. But apparently you can just walk in there and get free food. I don't know if it's like on specific days, but it's called Langar. I don't know what it is. I feel like if you're going to get tax exempt status, you should have to prove that you're doing something like that. Because there's tax exempt megachurches in the United States where it just turns out like, oh, the guy was living like a celebrity and like having sex with male prostitutes in trucker bathrooms and snorting cocaine every day. And that was literally just, he was just tricking people. Just like these televangelists. What was his name? Like Ted Haggard? Like, why is that tax exempt? It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy.
If there was evidence of going from slime to human beings, there'd be a massive amount of evidence showing interspecies from one macro species to another. And that's where I find the concept of evolution lacking. And so
I just want to ask them, like, okay, if you were to assign points of difference, how many points away from a wolf is a pug? Like, let's say it's like 50 points. Let's say a wolf is 50 points of difference away from a pug. How many points of difference away from a wolf would you need to get before you consider it to be a different species? Before you consider it to be a massive jump, like you're saying you need to believe in evolution? And if she says, like, 5 million or whatever, like however many, even though that's a ridiculous standard, however many points that she says she would need, then you just go like, okay, well, how many years did it take from a wolf to get to a pug? Right? That was within, you know, like what year did human beings start domesticating wolves? Let's see. So 15,000 to 40,000 years ago. Right? And so you're like, okay, if we're at 50 points and we need to get to like, let's say she said like 500 points or whatever, then you just times the amount of years. And you're like, okay, well, how much time do you think has passed from like the beginning of time up until now? Because you'll get that difference. You'll get that difference. You just need to, all you need to do is add more time. Like, recorded human history has not been over that long. Right? Like, if you can accept that there are small changes over generations, how can you not accept that there are large changes over more generations? How can you not accept that small change plus small change plus small change plus small change equals not small change? How, like, it's such a simple concept to grasp that it's baffling to me that, like, to just put it together in your brain like that. I don't understand how someone can be like, well, like, you've only ever seen part of something, but you refuse to, like I've only ever seen 5 candy bars. I refuse to accept that there could ever be 50 candy bars. It's such a weird thing yeah, it's I don't understand. It's a shit analogy, but
is
tried.
on the if there was a vast amount of evidence, solid evidence to back up evolution, that would influence a significant number of the vast number of people who believe in intelligent design.
That sends me close to despair, because
I mean,
because there's evidence of, for example, the transition from fish coming out of the water onto the land. It's beautiful evidence. It's elegant. I mean, they're lovely fossils. Go to Philadelphia and have a look.
That's
at the
not
beautiful
true.
fossil they've
I
got
know
there.
it.
I'm sure they have. Reptilian jaw has several bones. The mammalian lower jaw has only one bone, and the other bones that were in the reptile have now moved into the inner ear. It's a beautiful transition.
So, what is your cause in life?
What is your cause in life? She says to that. Like, what a weird thing to say.
But actually, you could use the genuine scientific factual evidence to the greater glory of your God, rather than running away from the evidence.
But again, that's where we differ. We don't believe we are running away from the evidence, and what we are seeking to do is to help people to understand who God is, that He's a loving God, and part of His love toward us is that He created us. The fact that He
and then
wanted us
but she said earlier, He was like, well, who would we teach that designed us? She was like, oh, well, I don't know. And now she's back to like, but He is a loving God, and that's what I'm here to teach, is that He created us as a loving creator.
exist.
Maybe
And
He did
that-
it via evolution, though.
And helping people to understand that there's a God who's created order in this universe, and that there are certain, as you've mentioned, laws in this universe. That even includes moral laws of how we are to treat one another. The work that we're working toward is helping people to understand these moral laws and live according to these moral laws, because not only will they benefit living healthier and happier lives, but our society will.
Doesn't the Bible like encourage slavery? Like, I'm not sure I'm not sure I want to be living under God's moral laws of how we should treat each other.
What's lacking in Darwin needs to be made up with somewhere else. The fact that Darwinian would lead to such a harsh and brutal life means that there's a great need for other people to be making this world a better place.
Yeah, but
and
if
that's
it's true,
that's what we are working on. And even though I may not agree like you do, hopefully you can appreciate the work that we're doing to make society a better place.
I mean,
Well, that was infuriating. She just like repeats talking points and doesn't actually engage with anything. I just got reminded of this. We'll watch through this real quick, because this is for people who have difficulty understanding evolution. This is a good understanding of it.
first, the eye. Charles Darwin himself.
I watched a bunch of shit like this when I was like 15 through 17. This was my jam. It's just a bunch of Richard Dawkins videos.
Said, "To this day, the eye makes me shudder." Creationists are particularly fond of the eye because they like saying, what is the use of half an eye? An eye only works, they say, if every little detail is in place. Until you've got that, the eye won't see anything at all, so how can it possibly have evolved? Well, suppose we start with an ancestor who didn't really have an eye at all, but just a single, simple sheet of light-sensitive cells. So this animal, with hardly any eye at all, will at least be able to tell the difference between light and dark.
Basically, what he's getting at here is
The
like
next stage.
a lot of people who don't understand evolution will they'll point to existing complexities like the eye or like, you know, other organs, and they'll be like, well, this is so complex, you can't just like have no eye and then an eye. But essentially what he's getting at is that even something that cannot even be considered an eye yet, but is just like 1/1,000,000th of a way there, like a fraction of a way there, is still more useful than nothing in terms of survival, right? You can have all you need is a single cell that can tell the difference between light existing and light not existing, and already as an organism you could be able to detect whether or not it's daytime, you'd be able to like you understand how like every insect will naturally go towards light. That is an instinct, from what I understand, or what I assume is an instinct to, help them get out of enclosed spaces. So if they're like going towards a cave or something, instinctually, as soon as they get to the dark, they'll be like, oh shit, and then start following the light to get out of the cave where there's going to be, water, food, etc. Right? So, or if they're like trapped underneath something, they'd be like, oh, here's how I get out. We've confused insects by creating artificial light, and so now insects go towards artificial light because they're not complex enough to understand the differences between, like they're moving so instinctually that they're not actively thinking about why they're moving somewhere. They're just doing it because that's what their system is telling them to do, right? So the easiest way to get bugs out of your house is to shut off the lights in your house. And if there's a little bit of light outside, just like open the window and then it'll go towards it. Or like open the door if there's a little bit of light outside, just shut off all the lights in your house. It's really, it's the most consistent way I can get rid of a bug in my house. But anyway, so there's like really the most basic ways of detecting light are still useful. Even if you don't have a fully formed eye yet, they can mean the difference between some members of a species surviving or not surviving. And then you take that small difference of, okay, so more of the ones with the photosensitive cell survived than the ones without, right? And you take that difference over time, and it's like, okay, wow, most of the ones without the light receptive cell are dead, maybe all of them. And then you have another mutation over time, and depending on how fast the reproductive cycle of the organism is, will depend on how fast the evolution takes place. Like human beings reproduce like over a long period of time compared to smaller organisms. That's why, viruses are able to mutate so quickly, is because they're constantly reproducing at speeds that are way faster than we like within like one of our lifetimes, like billions of times or some shit. But yeah, you take these small differences over time, and then it's like, okay, well, yeah, over time they become larger differences. It's not even some sort of like design, or you look at like a function of an animal and or species, and you don't say like, oh, this is this way so that they can do that. Like you can say that, but that's not really what it is. It's more of like an inevitability of like, oh, this is how things are, because otherwise, you imagine a species that didn't have that compared to the one that did. The one that did is going to pass on its genes, right? So
in evolution would be to have a shallow cup. This animal would be able to tell the direction that light is coming from, because a shadow would appear. If you can tell the direction a light is coming from, then you can tell the direction that a predator is coming from. It's easy to see that that shadow effect that we've just been witnessing would work progressively and gradually as the cup gets bigger. Let's make it bigger still now, Bryson. And this cup is even more effective. Just a little hole in the end. Right now, this animal has a very good idea of exactly where the light is, and by the same token, exactly where, for example, a predator is. And I think with this eye, we might even get a little image. See if we can get an image of Bryson's hand. That smudge there is Bryson's hand, and you can just about see a very dim image of his fingers. So an animal with an eye like this would be able to see perhaps just a little bit what kind of predator it was.
Yeah, like just tiny, gradual increments, tiny steps over time. And, like you don't need just the difference between like no eye and fully formed eye. Like even the tiniest change between no eye and an eye. Like there's billions of steps in between, but each one of those tiny steps, you know, over time can mean the difference between members with that mutation surviving and members without that mutation not surviving. You know, like it's if you just think about numbers and statistics and time, it becomes a lot easier to understand. Like individual human beings are not predictable, but human beings in numbers are insanely predictable. Like we know, like we become statistics the more of us there are. And so, you know, when there's so many members of a species, you can pretty accurately determine that, like, yeah, there's just tiny advantages. The tiniest advantage would mean that it would be more likely to pass on its genes. What's the name of the video? It's just Richard Dawkins demonstrates the evolution of the eye.
Now I can see a rather precise picture of Bryson's hand. It's not a very bright one, but I can see every finger clearly delimited. So I could see, if I were this animal, I could see my predator in some detail. There is an animal that has a pinhole camera for an eye. It's a mollusk called Nautilus. It's a relative of the octopus, but it lives in a shell, and there is its eye. Just has a simple hole, and seawater can flow in and out of that hole. This bit of rock here shows ammonites, which are a now extinct relative of Nautilus. They were once immensely common, as this rock suggests. Now, a pinhole camera is not a very good way of seeing. It does produce a sharp image, but because it's so narrow, you hardly get any light in. The answer to this problem is that ingenious device, the lens. Why doesn't Nautilus have a lens? Why didn't it evolve a lens? Well, I suspect that Nautilus may have got itself stuck on a little peak some way up Mount Improbable. When the ancestors of Nautilus came up the track here, up the path here, and got to this point, that way uphill looked just as inviting, so to speak, evolutionarily, as that way. Both of them were uphill. Evolution has no foresight. Evolution has no way of knowing that if you travel up
Strange
that way,
analogy.
you're going to end up with a lens. For the moment, this appears to be a perfectly good way to travel, because the pinhole camera at this level of illumination is an effective eye. But let's imagine what the ancestors of the squid and octopus did when they got to this junction point here. They just happened to go on up this way.
It's a
and
very
they started
strange
evolving
analogy.
a lens. How might the lens have evolved? Well, let's imagine that it started with just a single transparent sheet of some transparent material. All that it's doing is protecting the eye. In Nautilus, seawater flows right inside the eye. This animal now has some protection. The eye is really just the same as though there wasn't any transparent material there. So this is the next stage in evolution. This animal here, let's get an image of that. Okay, that's a rather better and above all brighter image of the hand. Let's have the next lens in. Right, now, if an animal that had an eye like that would have a really very, very clear view of its world, it could tell exactly what its predator was. There we are. Very nice. This animal can even see what its predator's face looks like. Upside down, but we all see upside down. So
I forgot we all see upside down.
But has there been enough time for the evolution of the eye? Well, recently a Swedish scientist called Dan Nilsson has tried to answer that question. He did pretty much the same as we've just been doing here, but he did it with a computer. He assumed that each step, which means each mutation, caused only a 1% change in the size of something, like, say, the steepness of a cup. He did this by telling the computer to measure various things about the eye that it had just drawn itself.
Our brains fill out the image.
Don't our brains also fill in gaps? Like manufacture probable images where we can't see?
Yeah, think about how easy it is to navigate, even though you have a big space in between your eyes.
Gradient
Yeah, our brains
of
are constantly
improvement,
filling gaps.
starting out with a
in.
flat
Like
retina.
that's every like week on Reddit. There's some like optical illusion post where it's just like a shadow, like it'll look like, this looks like the garbage can's floating, but it's just because there's like a what looks like a shadow underneath it, but it's not. Like a puddle or something. And because of our brain's interpretation of like, oh, we see shadows all the time, or that like window panel illusion, because our brains are used to, like, we've seen so many windows. Our brains simplify a lot of information instead of relearning every single bit just to be more efficient, I guess.
Is
Your
yes.
brain
This
filters
was
out your
Nielsen's
nose.
starting point with just a flat.
You also like smells or something, where it's like you smell something and then you don't smell it because you're just around it. You know, like people with bad BO don't smell their own bad BO because they're just always around it. Like what's the neutral smell? Like every place has a smell, but you don't smell it because it's not a new scent. It's like just something that you're used to.
So far we haven't learned anything that we didn't already know. There is a smooth progression, up Mount Improbable, for the eye. And Nielsen put into his computer model values of these quantities that were conservative. Conservative means that he was erring on the side of deliberately biasing his calculation to make it slow, to give it an estimate on the slow side of evolution. Nielsen found that the evolution of the eye, we've just seen, would take a surprisingly short time. It would take about 250,000 generations. Well, that might sound like quite a lot of generations, but we have a rather warped perspective.
Yeah.
Because after all, each one of us is only good for one generation.
Yeah.
But our human perspective is not the one that matters. The one that matters is the geological timescale.
Very cool. I like that video a lot. That's one that I would say is a good thing to share with people who don't quite understand evolution or are confused about how things work.
Hey everyone, it's June 2022, so let's update the Patreon credits. My $5 and up patrons are Wrigglemoss, Speak of the Joker, Brennan Keller, Melly, Black Mama 1993, Mitzi Marcella, Yup, Caden Mack, Andre Philippe, Charisma, the Super 1 player, Jacob Arndt, Zachary Kane, Samjul, Cheat.exe, Gothic Sith, Mandel Bro, Wales, Bo the Doggo, Gabriel Herrera, Hoofido, and Malav Shah. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you later.